guys, what's going on? It's Ash here coming at you today in Clash Royale, and today is going to be a great interview with a guest who's been on the channel quite a few times before, but none recently. It is Seth, aka formerly known as TheRumHam, back on the channel. Seth, it's been a long time, man. How you doing? How's Finland? How's Supercell?
It's wonderful. We're still in the throes of summer here, so I'm enjoying the last bit of sunlight before it gets dark for like 7 months in a row. But it's great right now. We just shipped the September update, which should be coming to you this week, and really excited to be on the channel and talk about it.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to have you. I have some questions from my viewers. There's so much to ask you about between the update, between balance changes, between ladder, between everything. So I just want to jump right into it and start with the update. Start with the new card, Goblin Giant. I always want to go to say Giant Goblin. I always have to pause for a second first. But Goblin Giant, I just wanted to ask you, because you are one of the balance gurus on the team, what do you think about his balance? Now, for me personally, I haven't played him, obviously, nearly as much as you have. But at first, he seemed like super OP and amazing. And then the more I played him, and granted, I've only played like 5 or 6 matches, he seems a little bit maybe underpowered, underwhelming to me, granted through 5 or 6 matches. What do you think of the new card? Do you think he's well-balanced in your opinion? What are your thoughts on him?
Well, the ideal spot for any card would be that if you play it at the right time, at the right moment, when you know what's in your opponent's hand and you know they don't have great counters to it, that card should feel like insanely overpowered and good. And if they do have counters to it and they react appropriately, then it shouldn't feel that strong. I mean, that's the case with a lot of win conditions in the game, like Graveyard, which can feel like really strong or sometimes just be countered, you know, pretty easily. And I hope that Goblin Giant falls into that niche where the right deck with the right support can make the most of him, but he's not just a card you can slam into any deck and find a ton of success. There are certainly decks that he's going to be very, very good against, and some that he's going to struggle against, and I think that's right where we want the win conditions to be.
Love it. Now, in your TV Royale video, great job on that, by the way, you had him in an interesting combo with the Miner, which I really liked, and then he died and the Spirit Goblins lived. What do you think, based on all your playtesting, would be like the best archetype for him?
Well, okay, so there's a ton of Giant decks out there, right? Giant kind of goes with everything. Yeah. Like anytime there's a new card that comes out, you're like, you know, Giant Night Witch, Giant Sparky, Giant Double Prince. Like Giant is pretty much the go-to tank for a lot of different beatdown sort of decks. Now, Goblin Giant is just different enough that I suspect some amount of those Giant decks would rather have Goblin Giant over the basic Giant. The ones that strike me as maybe the most likely is the Giant Miner beatdown decks that used to just play Giant like at the river along with Night Witch or something like that. I think Goblin Giant there kind of fills the game plan of that deck a little better. I also think that Giant Double Prince might be interested in having Goblin Giant because a lot of times you would use the double print. You'd like play Giant in the back and then split push by putting the double princes in the other lane. Because Goblin Giant is a bit better by himself, I think those sort of Giant Double Prince decks might like Goblin Giant because he's so much better solo. And he's also a bit quicker, so it's easier to play him in the back and then time the simultaneous attack.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to. That's a good point on the Giant Double Prince or Goblin Giant Double Prince. I'm looking forward to see how it happens or what it looks like in game. My next question for you, Rum, is, or Seth, what do you want to go by nowadays? I don't know.
I think Seth works. I think if many moons ago I would have known people were going to call me RumHam to my face, I might have picked a different name. that was a Reddit handle long before I ever decided to Twitch stream or do anything like that. So it is what it is. And I've got a little exclusive info for your channel, is that the Goblin Giant Double Prince theory can be tried out right from day one because Classic Deck is returning to Clan Wars. The Classic Deck battles will return with new and updated decks, and one of them will be a Goblin Giant Double Prince deck. So if you want to try that out, it'll be available for you pretty much day one of the update.
Ooh, I like that. Those are my favorite actual collection day modes, the classics, or the archetypes. So I'm really a big fan. So that's good news. Speaking of Clan Wars, quick question for you, quick bonus question, is one thing, I love Clan Wars, but one little thing about it is when you tie, it counts as a loss. Do you have any plans on making that different any time, or is that how it was intended and you're happy with it?
We've talked about it, but honestly, you need to win. You got, you know,
Gotcha.
you got to win. It's
so just
not,
win, and it's all set.
I mean, especially for War Day battles, it's like you either win or you didn't win.
Or you lose.
That's what we're tracking.
You win or you lose. Everything else is a loss. Gotcha. Okay. Next question for you is about balance, right? So, especially acutely in the last two balance changes, not as profound in the ones before that, but we saw for the first time in a while, a lot of cards that previously got a buff or a nerf got the opposite. So Royal Recruits, Royal Hogs, Valkyrie, etc. What are you happy with that, or maybe what are some lessons that you learned from your time there so far in terms of card balancing? Do you think that you went overboard on a card like Royal Recruits?
Well, for the most part, when it comes to balancing, the game is largely in a very balanced state, and that's a credit to Stefu and the work that he did for the 2 years before I took over. So I would say out of our 87 cards, maybe 40 to 50 of them I would consider very balanced. I mean, they're healthily within a use rate and a win rate that go up and down with each meta, but they're never too strong or too weak. And for the most part, those cards really aren't up for balancing, right? Like those are just going to be left as is. So that leaves the remaining chunk of cards, and a lot of these cards are sort of chronically bad cards that have been very, very weak for a long time, and in a lot of their situations the win rate is like abysmally low. So we have seen, as a good example with Witch, that card has been buffed 5% here, 5% there, like a half dozen times over the years, and it's never really made a huge difference in its performance. So at some point you're forced with like, okay, we need to do something dramatic to give this card a niche, to give it a role and a space within the game. And that's why we did something like really dramatic, like with the Witch buff. Funny enough, the stats for Witch actually weren't that bad. Left in a vacuum, she didn't really need a nerf. Her win rate wasn't really that high. Her use rate really wasn't that high. But I do think that a lot of that was because Valkyrie was very popular and very prominent. And we saw in CRL that when Poison was banned or when Valkyrie was banned, suddenly like Witch would come out to play. So I thought it prudent that if we were going to nerf Valkyrie, it would make sense to take Witch at the same time. And what I wanted to focus was two things, was that you needed a very specific set of spells to counter her. So by allowing it to be Fireball plus Log, that gave a new option of spells you could use to counter her. And then also, along with the lightning buff, you would be able to lightning her one level higher. So I think those two things were a good way of addressing Witch without hurting the one thing that she is really good at, which is spawning lots of skeletons. I didn't want to nerf the skeleton spawning because that's the thing that she does. And to return her to a state of being like a weak wizard didn't seem to be the best course of action. Now, in the case of a card like Royal Recruits, we legitimately thought that at 6 cost, that was too expensive to appear in every archetype. Initially, during playtesting, Royal Recruits started at 8 cost and then 7 cost and eventually ended up down at 6 cost, along with other stat changes as well. It wasn't just the cost that got reduced. Sure. But we went out at 6 cost because we wanted it to be cheap enough that you could use it in decks, but we still thought it would be so expensive it wouldn't appear in every archetype. So we were very surprised that even when it was powerful as it was, but also that it was played in everything. Like Lava Hound decks were squeezing it in, Golem decks were putting it in there, Three Musketeers were playing it, like everyone was fitting it in at 6 cost. And it was so powerful, like the win rates and use rates were so high that I did not feel like simply putting it at 7 cost would solve that problem. There's a lot of times we were watching Royal Recruits dominate a game, and I never thought like, oh boy, if the defender just had one more elixir, this would be a clean defense, right? Like it was a bit more than that. So the 8 cost was a dramatic nerf. I'm not going to say that it was like a small nerf or anything, but the design intent behind that was to make it so that Royal Recruits stood on its own as this very powerful card, and was expensive enough that even if it was strong, it would not be easily splashable in other archetypes. So we decided to keep it at 8 cost and instead try to buff the stats to match it, to make it like P.E.K.K.A or like Golem, these like expensive cards that can really define your whole deck instead of being a splashable defense. One thing that's going to be interesting about Royal Recruits is how the ability to split them 4 and 2 is going to buff them, because that is, I think, a significant buff to that card without changing any stats, because now you'll have these options of like 4 royal recruits can often be a very viable defense. So before it was like you had to spend 8 and be willing to have only half of that defend and the other half was just going to go attack. But now there's going to be times where if somebody comes in with like Hog Rider plus Goblin Gang, putting 4 recruits on one side is a lot of damage, and that's only 1 more elixir than the actual Hog Rider Goblin Gang attack, and you'll have a pretty decent counterattack on both sides. So we'll see how that buff goes along with the damage buff, and hopefully find a good niche for royal recruits. But the good news is that even if they do become strong, I don't think that they'll be in every deck archetype like they were before.
Yeah, it's a solid answer. And it's just going back to kind of, and I think the recruits, I have a sneaky suspicion that actually will be used now at 8 Elixir with that buff. And, you know, actually, I could ask you about those cards for days and days, and we'd be here for hours. But I really want to move into a really popular viewer question for you. And I'm sure you can see where I'm going here, Seth. It's the ever so popular Elite Barbarians and Royal Giant, right? Let's talk Elite Barbs and RG for a sec. First off, I don't even know where to start, but first off, answer me this. Like, at one point in time, like 6 months ago or so, right around the time that you came on board with Supercell, I think it was Tim or somebody mentioned that there was potentially going to be a Royal Giant buff coming in the future. We still haven't seen that, but I want to ask you about the buff, and if the rumors are true, why, and what is your thoughts? Like, you know, elaborate more on both of those cards, and just especially the damage that they're doing to people on ladder in the, you know, 3,000 to 5,000 trophy range.
Sure. Well, we are currently working on a Royal Giant. I don't want to say buff, because I would say it's more of
I was
a rework.
bracing myself.
Well, it is a buff in a way. Like, ideally, Royal Giant would be like 10% better, because its use rates in challenges and its win rates in challenges are really abysmal. Like, they're not where you want them to be for a win condition. And even on ladder, even though Royal Giant is typically thought of as like a ladder terror, there's only one gap, 4,000 to 4,500, where Royal Giants even meet an average use rate. At every other section of the ladder, they are below average use rate. Not a particularly strong card, and as most people will attest to, you only see like level 12 and 13 Royal Giants. It's not like you're playing against even equally leveled Royal Giants, whereas you might see an equal level Hog or whatever at the same.
Yeah, they're only good if
range.
over leveled. Like,
correct.
And then they're annoying.
So Royal Giant is a problem because even though it is not a very good card, it is a very frustrating design. So while I want to make it something like 10% better, it's not a card that we can just be like, 10% more health, all done here, because it doesn't solve a lot of the underlying problems with what makes the card so frustrating. So we've been working on a rework that is going to change multiple stats at the same time and hopefully allow it to be a more powerful card if unanswered, but giving you more opportunities to answer and defend against it, so that it doesn't feel like it's really oppressive and just locks onto your tower right away and is just, you know, one of those cards that's just really, really frustrating to deal with. That could be coming before the end of the year, ideally, because we've been testing it a lot. We're handling it very delicately because, of course, we know Royal Giant is a controversial card, but that's something that could be coming by the end of the year. Elite Barbs are in a little bit of a different spot, because even though they are also not very good in challenges, they are very popular on the ladder. They're called Angry Barbarians in the game code, but the Elite Barbarians, Elite Barbarians are one of the top 10 most popular troops on the ladder, and actually, I think one of the top 5 or 10 most popular cards to upgrade in the whole game. So it's weird. That's not weird. It's just because they're very popular, there's less desire to go out and find a way to buff them, because they're already seeing a lot of play. Whereas Royal Giant is both weak in challenges and increasingly unpopular on the ladder. So that seems like something that needs more of an instant fix than something like Elite Barbarians, that even if they're not great in challenges, they're still seeing a ton of play.
Is it your view, Seth, that every card in the game should be viable? Meaning that, like, a card like Royal Giant or Elite Barbarians, they're looked at as you know, skillless cards, as simple and frustrating mechanics. Would you be happy just nerfing those cards or keeping them low, or is it your kind of fundamental belief that every card ought to have a chance to shine in the game at tournament level standard?
Every card should be viable, but that doesn't mean every card should be equal.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is, even if we had some wizard genie, super matrix algorithm come and make every card exactly numerically balanced, that doesn't mean that players are going to use them in equal amounts. A card like Clone or a tower like Bomber or Bomb Tower, those cards will always be less used than other cards simply because they're a little more niche, or they have these kind of glaring drawbacks like can't attack air. Some cards like Miner are very unique in what they do and provide a new win condition that they're always going to be overrepresented simply because there's nothing that can really do what Miner does. So ideally, every card would have a niche, but I do think it is okay for cards to, for example, only have a 2 or 3% win rate if the, I'm sorry, 2 or 3% use rate if the win rate is healthy. So we actually see a lot of cards like that right now that are not that popular, but are pretty strong. Like Hunter, I think, and Bowler fall into those categories where they're not that popular, but their win rate is very healthy. And the decks that like to run Bowler are like happy with Bowler, and same thing with Hunter. So like I don't really see buffs for either of those two cards coming on the horizon, even though they're not as popular as other cards, simply because they are good within their niches. And in the converse is something like Hog Rider. We see a lot of requests to nerf Hog Rider, but I swear on my life, Hog Rider has like the lowest win rate out of the top like 20 most popular cards in the game. It's one of those things where it's really not that strong. It's just that it's very straightforward, it's very direct, it's very easy to pilot. So even though I do believe Hog Rider's a balanced card, it's always going to be a bit more popular than its power level would entail, simply because of how friendly it is to play.
Yeah, I totally agree with that philosophy as well, and especially comparing cards like Hog Rider. I too think Hog Rider is balanced despite the use rates. But circling back, final question on Elite Barbs in Royal Giant is specifically, although I do agree with you 100% on Royal Giant and Elite Barbs, both of them really kind of suck at tournament level standard. But what do you think of the ladder issue in specifically, right? What do you think about the issue with them being over leveled or easy to level and just absolutely making people miserable? Is there a way to fix it?
Oh, yeah, over-leveling is something we talk about a lot, but truthfully, that's not a balance problem. That's an economy problem. So we can solve those in very different methods. So since the game has come out, if you have open chest, you are getting cards distributed equally. You're getting an equal distribution of pretty much every card that comes out of your chest. Well, we've always, up until very recently, given out way more commons and rares than epics or legendaries. The last update, the one where we restructured the magical chest and the golden chest and all those things, was designed specifically to give you less commons and more epics and legendaries to try to balance out that ratio. And on top of that, card requesting has been the only way for you to really manipulate the cards in your collection and accelerate some cards faster than others. We have planned over the next several updates what we're calling player choice initiatives, which are more features in the game that allow a player to direct their collection in the way that they see fit. So trade tokens are part one of a many-part series of changes. That should be in this direction. So now with trade tokens, not only do you finally have another way to move up legendaries and epics at a healthy rate to try to keep up with your main deck, commons and rares, but you will of course still have the ability to get big chunks of commons and rares by trading them with your clanmate. So if I don't play Knight, but I play Goblin Gang, my opponent or my clanmate plays Knight but not Goblin Gang, or maybe I said that in the reverse, I'm sorry, but you know what I mean. We can both play very popular commons, but maybe not the same one at the same time. It now is going to be very advantageous for us to swap Knights for Goblin Gangs, and both of us get to level our cards up at a quicker rate. You should be getting, though, more epic and legendary trade tokens overall, and each one should advance your collection a little more. So now with the ability to trade 10 epics at a time, that's 2.5 weeks worth of requesting. If you and I both get an epic trade token and we make the same trade twice, 20 epics is huge for ladder players. That's a huge advantage that's going to allow them to really consistently maybe catch up their epics, and then you won't have, I think, so many problems with people just focusing on commons and rares, because you'll have other ways to focus on the other rarities in the game.
I love that, because it's not super obvious at first, but basically the way you're solving this is allowing people to easier upgrade which epic cards and legendary cards and rare cards they want, so they won't need to overlevel the common cards, right?
Yeah, the only reason that over-leveling of commons is a problem is that the only way you can focus on any cards in the game is through the card request system, which is limited to commons and rares. Mm-hmm. For example, if you could have requested epics this whole time, I think you would see a more even distribution of cards. So by doing things like trade tokens and other things in the future, we hope that that will just sort of naturally resolve itself as players are more able to focus on epics and legendaries. Great example with trade tokens. Let's say you are the weird Sparky player in your clan. You're like the one guy who just loves Sparky. You're going to be a very popular trade partner because people know that they can give you a Sparky, which they may not want, for a legendary that they're looking for. And because of that, you might very quickly get your Sparky to level 3, 4, or maybe even, oh, I'm sorry, I got to fix that, level 11, 12, or even level 13. So that means that you, as a Sparky player, might end up with a max legendary before you actually end up with a max rare or epic, and that is going to really change the makeup of what people play on the ladder.
I love that, man. I really love the card request. The tokens in the request system, or not the request system, but the tokens in the card trading, to me, is the best part of this update by far, and the favorite thing that I've seen in quite a while. I had like a ton of viewer questions to ask you, but I want to be respectful of your time, and we've already taken a lot of it. So I just want to ask you 2 questions from subscribers before we let you go, and they both have to do with new cards. So maybe you can give a hint, maybe not, I don't know. But Jordan asks, do you think there will ever be another 1 or 9 elixir card in the future, or maybe even 10 elixir card?
Hey, never say never. We have had some ideas for 1 elixir cards. We have had some ideas for more expensive cards as well. But of course, it always is going to come down to the gameplay and the testing and what feels right. One thing I think we've been a little lax on recently is actually cheaper cards. The last half dozen or so cards that have come out have all been a bit on the more expensive side. So we've been trying to theory craft a few more inexpensive cards, because of course cards that cost 2, 3, or 4 are much easier to splash into a wider variety of decks, whereas cards like Royal Recruits, Royal Hogs, Rascals, etc. have been a bit more expensive.
Yeah, sure. How about a 0 elixir card?
Never. Well, I guess never say never, but probably never. That creates way too many problems with regards to cycling and stuff. Like, weirdly, if we did a 0 elixir card, it would probably still cost elixir, in that it would maybe like freeze your elixir generation for a period of time. So you could play it at 0, but then you would not make elixir for like 5 seconds after, or something like that. Let me give you a
10-second pitch on my 0 elixir card idea.
All right, hit me.
All right, Cannibalize is the name of the card, right? And 0 elixir cost, and all it does is gives you 1 elixir. So basically, it's a huge net gain, but it does a significant amount of tower damage to your lowest tower.
That's interesting. Yeah, like I think that's the sort of stuff where if we did make a 0 elixir card, it would have to have some sort of significant trade-off. It could not be, just 0 and do something. Couldn't even be 0 cost to make 1 skeleton, because the ability to
cycle that,
to cycle would be bananas.
All right. So last question is, are we ever going to get a legendary building, Seth?
Ooh, you know what? I like the idea of legendary buildings. I've prototyped a few of them, and we've kind of played with them a bit on the team, but we haven't quite found anything that has really felt great yet. But that is something that I know players would love to see. If we can find a really good idea for one, I don't think it's out of the question. It's just a matter of course, finding the right card at the right time.
All right, awesome. Well, Seth, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview, and really congratulations on the balance. I think the last balance update was really spot on, and the update is really exciting too. Any final words or anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to mention?
I actually, when we were off camera, you were asking me about the Valkyrie change and the kind of thought process behind that, so I think that's an easy one to address.
Yeah, let's tackle it. I think the question was around, like, how do you decide which stat to nerf or buff on a given card?
Yeah, so with Valkyrie's an interesting case, because the most common thing that people said was, reduce her hit points. But what's interesting is if you look at Valkyrie's hit points per elixir cost, so the amount of health that she has per elixir cost, Knight has a much higher amount. And even that was so certainly before the big buff, Knight had a much higher ratio. And even after getting 7% more health, Knight still gets more elixir for the health cost than Valkyrie does. So we felt that like nerfing her health would take her out of that mini tank role, which we actually really like. We think she's done a good job as a mini tank. The biggest problem we think with Valkyrie is that she was a very competent one-on-one fighter. And so we were looking at ways to make her much more of a splash-focused anti-swarm attacker and reduce what made her so good at one-on-one fights. And the most direct way to do that is hit speed, so that if she is in an extended combat with something like a Prince or a Mini Peck or a Lumberjack, the high DPS of those cards can shine through and win the combat. Valkyrie was swinging so fast that she was basically hitting very hard and as quick as a one-on-one fighter, which made her a pretty good duelist. I also think that putting her hit speed up higher creates more separation between her and Dark Prince. You've got Dark Prince at 1.3 hit speed and Valkyrie's at 1.4, so it really sort of blurred the lines between them and made them similar. Now you have Valkyrie doing a 360 attack, but at a quite a bit slower swing rate than Dark Prince, who only hits in an arc but a bit quicker. So I think this is a kind of our ongoing job, is to make sure that not only is every card balanced and strong, but that there's enough disparity between different, similar cards that fill the same role. They need to be different enough that a deck really goes, well, geez, do I want to play Dark Prince or do I want to play Valkyrie? And they have these trade-offs in stats.
I like that. So clear wins between different cards of the same class. And it sounds like when you're going to nerf or buff a card, you're actually looking at, okay, what is the problem here? Or what needs to be better? Like, what specifically about the card that makes sense? Is that kind of the gist?
Yeah. I mean, of course, the goal is not to reduce Valkyrie back to the dustbin, right? She didn't see really any competitive play for about a year prior to her buff. I think from the time that Bowler was launched and the original Trifecta deck died to the most recent big buff that made her popular again, she was more or less non-existent in tournament play. And so the goal isn't to like make her very popular for 3 months and then make her extinct again. We just want to bring her back down to where she's about as popular as Ice Golem and Knight, and there's a nice balance between those three cheap mini tanks, and you have to decide, which one do I want to play. So right now, obviously, Valkyrie has been much more popular and powerful than the others. So the goal is to do a significant enough nerf to actually make a dent in those numbers without being too much and overdoing it. And I think it's really difficult because the game is largely very balanced, and it's very easy to take a card from hardly not used at all to be very, very popular. I mean, we just saw that with Royal Hogs and Cannon Cart. Those cards were literally bottom 5, bottom 10 in use rates, like talking 1% use rates in the game. And we did relatively small buffs. We didn't take the damage up at all. We didn't, with Royal Hogs, we just made the first hit go a bit faster, and it jumped it from a bottom 5 card to a top 5 card, right? So it's very, very tricky to not overdo it. And I think that's why you're seeing with the monthly changes sometimes iterative moves where we'll buff a card and see how it goes, then either buff it or nerf it again, trying to find that sweet spot middle ground.
Well, thank you again for the explanation, the clarification on all these topics, Seth. Really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the channel. It's always fun to be here, and I hope you guys all enjoy the September update. I'm really excited about all the features and the balance changes. I'm hoping that the new meta is very, very exciting, and of course, get out there into your clans and start trading. I personally am opening up RumHam's Log Emporium, slinging logs to my clanmates. I've got my level 4 log. I don't really feel like I need a level 5 log, so all those extra logs are on the trade block so I can max out my Mega Knight.
Yeah, man. I only have I think 4 legendaries that I need to max out, so everything else is up for grabs. But I can't wait to start trading too, man. And I just gotta give you a last shout out too. It's gonna sound so whatever suck uppy, but it's true, man. But ever since you joined the CR team, not only has the game just continued to go in a great direction as of late, the last couple updates, but also the communication. I just have to applaud you, man, between Twitter and just coming on channels like this and just interacting in the community. It's been really, really refreshing. And your Reddit posts. So keep up the good work, man, and thank you.
Well, I got to say, it's certainly a team effort. I mean, there's so many people who contribute to Clash Royale, even things like the TV Royale stuff. That's other, great Supercell employees who come on over to our side of the office and chip in to help make those things a reality. And of course, there's, infinitely hardworking server engineers, client engineers, data scientists, and of course community managers, Tim and Drew. It truly is a team effort. You could hire 10 more RumHams and nothing would get done any faster. There's a lot of people actually doing the legwork, and I just come on the channels to talk about it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for the communication, and we'll talk to you soon, man.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
All right. Guys, that's going to do it. Hope you enjoyed this interview. Huge shout out to Seth again for coming on. And guys, I hope you enjoyed all the information. There was a ton of it, but let me know what you think in the comments below. Shout out to Brent Chong, my YouTube partner in Stats Royale. Check out their information in the description below. Thank you for watching. And as always, take care, guys.